Hey guys, welcome to Let's Be Heard, where we're turning whispers about women's health into powerful conversations. Every week, I'm going to be bringing you raw, honest talks with innovators and experts who are reshaping healthcare. From period problems to hormone mysteries, we're going to be diving into these topics you want to understand better. No awkward silences, there are no questions off limits, and especially no judgy vibes. Just honest dialogue about our bodies and health. Join us as we break down barriers, share stories, and create health dialogues that we wish we had growing up. I'm your host, Maddie Holman, women's health advocate and VC investor based in New York. Disclaimer, this podcast is intended to be informational only and not a source of medical advice. We aim to share stories, awareness, and resources available, but for any medical advice, seek out your provider. Hi, Traci. Welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Thanks for having me, Maddie. Nice to be here.
So I like to kick off every episode really giving some backstory. So could you explain what was your why or health experience that got you interested in the fertility space and then ultimately led you to start Onto Health?
Great question. I think I'm going to give a little bit of a windy answer because I think it's typically a confluence of factors. I've been a little bit of a tumbleweed in my career where I've rolled through some different industries, but accumulating more as I go, which I think is the important part of amalgamating information. But one of the key things that I think about when I think about healthcare, particularly in the United States, is geographic access. I grew up in the rural South, and there were a couple of acute health situations with my parents when I was younger, and you become really aware of how much geography matters and how little access you have to quality healthcare in some rural parts of the United States. And I think fertility is no different and probably even more extreme. I can't say that I was particularly aware of fertility as a young individual, but as an LGBTQ individual, I did become aware earlier, and I think have more of a natural acceptance, I think as many LGBTQ individuals do, around, okay, if we're going to build a family, it's going to look a little different. And so I think these things kind of build up throughout your life and alongside whatever professional skills you develop. Another interesting thing, I went to college with Elizabeth Carr, and she was the first IVF baby ever born in the United States.
Wow.
And we spent a pretty decent amount of time together in school. And, I'll never forget that was her fun fact on when I met her. And so I think there's this sort of subtext that I've had in my life around fertility, at least some awareness. I started out my career in finance, but I wasn't doing deals in the front. I was more in back middle office, a lot of accounting work, controller work, analytics. And then I did industry agnostic consulting. And I got pretty burnout on that tail end, like mid COVID. And I thought, I have this Swiss Army knife set of skills. And I started looking around in the startup space, and I came across Mate Fertility, which I joined as a head of finance and then eventually became the CEO. And it was fascinating because it's an industry that's not that old. I'm 44 years old, so I went to college with the first IVF baby in the United States. So it's pretty much the same age as me. A little bit older. There was a lot of research that led up to that point. But I think what I was fascinated by was the fact that this industry was built outside of the healthcare industry by and large. It's a part of healthcare, but it's also not. It's historically been cash pay. And so it was intellectually stimulating, which is the number one most important thing to me. Is this intellectually stimulating? Is it a big problem to solve? And does it affect a lot more than I think people realize it affects? Everything from individuals' happiness and their ability to thrive by reproducing if they want, or the implications on demographics, on societal wellness and things like that. So it was this opportunity for me to dive into something that I found personally engaging and intellectually stimulating, as well as, quite frankly, solvable, but certainly not quickly.
Very interesting path. And I love when it is a little bit more windy. I think it makes it more interesting. And I love that fun fact that you went to school with Elizabeth Carr. That's pretty cool. And you make a good point about the fertility being part of healthcare, but also being outside of it. I never really fully appreciated that, but it makes a lot of sense, especially, which I'm sure we'll dive in a little bit later on, the current healthcare system and what's covered versus what's not covered in terms of reimbursement. I'm curious too, as you mentioned, you got into mate fertility, and then now you're also into onto health, but also from a patient experience or from family planning. How has that part influenced or shaped how you are building companies in this space?
Yeah, I mean, so I when I was at Mate, tail end of Mate before it was acquired, I met my now wife, and we both knew we wanted to have kids. And it's been fascinating to be on the other side, trying to build a business where I'm talking to people like you, or I'm talking to other investors or, potential partners in the space and explaining this complex problem and then going through it as a patient and experiencing it real time, having a lot of the wind at my back because I do know more than the average bear when it comes to fertility. And then still facing incredible headwinds. I think the wind at my back was perceived only. I think as we went through the beginning stages of the process, there's no good time and to start. But I think one of the things I said to my wife at the time, I said, I think we better start now because I don't know how long this is going to take, right? And
Yeah.
we started with IUI, did two unsuccessful IUIs, and because of age and other factors, we were like, you know what? Let's not burn any more calories here. Let's just move on. But then that led us to the next step in the process, which was massively more challenging than I anticipated it being. And quite frankly, I didn't feel like it should have been. And it's one of the things that my co-founder and I, we double down on certain things because it seems so small, but it's not. My wife had frozen her eggs a number of years before at a clinic, and initially we were going to create embryos at that clinic. I asked them for their address to send the donor sperm. They never even provided the address, right? So I had decreasing confidence with this particular clinic. And so we made the decision to move those oocytes out, which end to end, that entire process took almost 7 months, which is just crazy.
Wow.
That's like really valuable time.
Yeah.
And we were increasingly frustrated because we felt like we couldn't move forward until we knew how many embryos and until we moved those oocytes and created those embryos. So it was like a 7 month standstill. And for my wife's 40, she's going to be the carrier. Those months are critical because we needed to know, okay, do we have 4 or 5 good embryos to result in, 2, potentially 3 live births? Or do we need to do another egg retrieval? I don't want to call it nefarious, but it was some questionable decisions made around the transportation of the tissue. And so it was just really wild to be on the other side as I'm also talking about these things and trying to improve it. And it was really reinforcing that this is important and it's an industry that's not highly regulated. There are regulations in place in key areas, but it doesn't all work together as a highly regulated ecosystem. And so I look at everything like with curiosity. So I think a lot of people would have been more traumatized or upset about it, but I'm like, opportunity for improvement, opportunity for improvement. Let's make sure that we don't do this, or this, because that's a terrible experience for patients.
It makes a lot of sense. And I remember when I first started really becoming curious about learning more aspects about women's health, fertility was such a big area of focus. And I kept wondering, like, why are there so many companies in this space? And never fully really appreciating it in the beginning of how complex and how many different parts of that process are just very frictionful. There's not really this seamless process. There's a lot to unpack, and there's a reason why it's still such a pain point and why it hasn't been solved. And so, before diving into your company a bit more and what you guys provide and how you're tackling the current issues and friction points in the industry, want to take a step back and give a baseline of what fertility is, especially with the audience that is listening in. How would you explain fertility to them in easy to understand terms?
It's a great question and I think this is an overarching theme of the industry as well, that there's a lot of information and material out there, but it's not necessarily serving the average population. It's more academic in nature and like debating PGT or this or that, or debating the need for an ERA, which who knows what that stuff is, right? So I would say like fertility at its most simplest terms is understanding the like human reproductive system and knowing which, listen, there are mounds of information that I've learned about my own reproductive organs since I started working at Mate Fertility 4+ years ago. And it's wild to think that you can get to that advance of an age and still be learning things that maybe arguably we should know.
I'm with you there.
And I think for men and women, and then of course, depending on how you identify or who your partner is, like different things are important, right? Like we were talking about with LGBTQ. I think fertility is really your ability to reproduce naturally through intercourse. And, you know, I think we do a really good job of talking to people. Well, I'm gonna take that back. I think we do an okay job of talking to people about how not to get pregnant. But I don't think many people know, and I'll include myself in this category, that you really only have about a 20% chance of getting pregnant if both people are healthy, you're ovulating, all the conditions are right for reproduction. You only have about a 20% chance on a monthly basis. And I was pretty shocked by that piece of data.
Yeah, I would expect it to be higher.
Because I think we're taught to fear, you know, we spend most of our lives, especially at this point in time, as like we have careers and we have all these things going on. You know, we have the ability to postpone, or at least we think we do, these decisions. And I think we just don't have a high degree of baseline knowledge about science as a society, or about our own bodies and how it all works.
I completely agree with you on that. In a lot of aspects of women's health, it's scary, but also comical in the way that the only way to have, that perspective on it without it getting dark is that we are, sometimes strangers in our own bodies and trying to navigate and understand what that is. So I completely agree. If you have that foundation, that makes all the difference. And so in terms of fertility, what are some different things that can impact your chances of being able to get pregnant?
This is a juicy one, maybe juicier than you would think. And this is why I love this industry, because it's so complex. Like there's no singular thing. So obviously there's lifestyle decisions that can impact reproduction, smoking. There's a lot of data out there about male infertility and smoking weed, which like I wouldn't have guessed. There's a lot of different things there. We have increasing rates of early onset cancer in young adults, which only 50% of people, young adults who get diagnosed with cancer, get counseled on fertility preservation, which is pretty shocking. And it's sad, because that is a choice that's forever taken away from those individuals. There are environmental factors. They recently discovered microplastics in follicular fluid for the first time. Terrifying, but true. And then I think there are also the immeasurable factors. We know that stress has a very bad impact on our health and wellness overall. We don't know how that impacts people's fertility. I mean, at this juncture, we can do a fertility assessment, and if someone has PCOS, as an example, we can say to that person with a high degree of confidence, hey, you're not infertile, you're not ovulating regularly. Here are some things we can do to manage that. And then there's a strong chance that you'll be able to conceive naturally. If someone has endometriosis, which is a whole rabbit hole that we probably don't want to go down on this one, I can introduce you to somebody to go deep on that topic. That's going to have an impact, and it's not clean to diagnose endometriosis. It's very challenging to do it in a meaningful way. And then there's, of course, lifestyle, like back to lifestyle, but a different angle on it. LGBTQ. I could try all I want. We're not going to get pregnant, and different things like that. So I think that it's really like this multifaceted set of factors that can impact somebody's fertility. And it's pretty daunting. I mean, you see people, we know that 64% of people who seek out initial counseling for fertility don't complete the process, which is shocking. I mean, that's a high intent person who's either been referred or unable to conceive. And more than half of them don't make it to treatment for a variety of reasons. But a big one is that it's just overwhelming. And, of course, we know the big ones like finances and access, but it's a process that takes way longer than people expect, and it's emotionally draining. And you can go down the rabbit hole of like, oh, well, let me change my diet and let me make sure I'm doing X and Y. You could literally make yourself mad, and still it may just be unexplained infertility, which could be environmental, it could be stress, who knows?
No, I completely see how that can be overwhelming, and also just how you can drive yourself a little bit crazy if you try to control every aspect of that or try to optimize it in that way. I know I have family and also friends who are starting to think about having kids, and the amount of stress that goes into that and the pressure, especially as you hear stuff in the news about higher rates of infertility challenges, and that just doesn't help adding to that already stressful situation, because it's something that's important. Wanting to have
Yeah.
a family, that comes with a lot of different types of emotion. And
Yeah.
so when you throw other stuff into it, it doesn't help in that way. But I'm curious, as you mentioned, with the different process of going through your fertility journey, where do patients go? Is it mainly OBGYNs? Are there other professionals in this process that people should know about?
So approximately 84% of patients turn to their generalist practitioner first, be that a primary care or an OBGYN. And it there's a huge cognitive dissonance between what people think doctors know versus what doctors actually know. And it's through no fault of the doctors, but for even women's health professionals, OBGYNs, in their medical training, the only fertility is elective, 2-week rotation, which seems
Wow.
just so counterintuitive. I think it can be extended, but in general, it's just not included in the curriculum, which it's like ultimate upstream systemic change. Like, let's change women's health curriculum to include more fertility. Primary care, nothing really.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that I really deeply and systemically believe needs to change, or believe needs to systemically change, is we need to empower these generalists to at least be armed with a baseline set of knowledge, information. And a lot of them do. A lot of them have relationships with reproductive endocrinology specialists, fertility specialists, of which there are very few. There's only about 1,200, 1,100. The numbers vary depending on the source of data practicing in the United States, and they're predominantly aggregated in major metropolitan areas. I think it's something like 35% of all reproductive endocrinologists are practicing in New York alone.
Wow.
Don't quote me on that one. So everybody, I'm disclaimer, I'm not totally certain on that one. But like LA, San Francisco, New York, Miami, Chicago, the vast majority of people practicing this profession are in big areas. So I think people are turning to their generalists. One of the things that I've learned over the past number of years is that doctors want to be able to help their patients, but they're also very conscientious of how far they want to go in that helping process. And it's also difficult to change the ways of working. So if the way of working has always been, hey, I'm just going to send you to this specialist, well, from a patient experience perspective, that stinks, because then they're just left out in the cold, and maybe they refer to them to somebody specific, maybe they don't. And then you go out and you start researching, and depending on where you are, it might take you 6 months to get an appointment if there isn't much access. So I think one of the things that I really have been focusing on a lot is how do we create these meaningful enrichment tools for generalists to take it, maybe it's just a little baby step, and they're learning how to appropriately incorporate a conversation about their reproductive goals. At the same time, they're talking to them about birth control, whether you're a man or a woman, like doctors talk about birth control. How do we incorporate little things, and how do we make it fit into the existing ways of working without feeling overwhelming to the clinicians? They're already busy. A lot of them, especially if they're insurance, they're taking razor thin margins that are getting thinner and thinner. Of course, there's liability, particularly for OBGYNs, which is
Oh,
outrageous. So how do we build something that feels truly an empowerment and enrichment tool for them? It can add new revenue to their ecosystem as well, not just in the form of assessments and diagnostics, but oftentimes, and this is one of the things that leads to it taking so long, you walk through the doors to get a fertility assessment. They're going to give you an ultrasound and they see in your uterus you have some polyps. So you're going to have to go have those polyps removed. So there's this whole ecosystem that the new service line can bring into a generalist practice. And what I've been focused on is how do we make that meaningful and manageable for generalists without them feeling like they're taking on too much too fast. They feel supported in the process.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think also a great segue into what you guys are doing at Onto Health and how you're solving that missing gap in fertility care today. Because I agree with you. I think if you're going to change providers' behavior, and it's got to be something that makes them feel financially worth it for them as well, because as you mentioned, razor thin margins, and also it's good for the patients too.
So it's kind of twofold. We own and operate a full function fertility clinic just outside of Denver, Colorado. And that is an end-to-end patient experience. It's that specialist experience that you're talking about. We have an embryology lab, but we think about it also as our sort of testing grounds for any new products that we create, not just for the clinicians, but also for the patients. And a big part of the problem, and I think one of the areas that my co-founder Gary and I get into the weeds on, is it's really about some little things that are not going well. And most of the tools that clinics are using are internally facing. So they may be great for the clinician, but they don't really provide much transparency or insight to the patient. I mentioned that 64% of patients don't make it from first appointment to treatment. Well, there's 23 unique states that a patient can be sitting in to get from point A to point B. And as it stands today, I think by and large, it's a patient-driven process. And in order for that 64% to start decreasing, we have to make it a clinic-driven process or a process-driven process, whereby it's not the patient always having to initiate next action. And that's another thing that my wife and I found really frustrating, is it was always us driving the process forward, which makes you feel like, well, I'm paying you the better part of 25 or 30 grand. Why am I the driver here? I expect some level or high, not to be preposterous, but if you pay $25,000 for a vacation, you're going to expect some level of white glove service. And there's just this huge gap where, well, the patient's driving the process forward, and that's got to shift. So that's one thing we're working on, is improving that patient experience from the ground up. So it's easy to look at what we have in Denver and just say, oh, you're running a fertility clinic. But it's really our incubation lab, where we're building new technology to increase the transparency for the patients and create things that we don't have to create two tools, one for the clinician and one for the patient. What if we created one tool that gives the clinician the right information at the right time and the patient the right information at the right time? How do we do that better? Because I think if you were to talk to a bunch of other executives in the space, they're all going to say it's a big problem. So nobody is very good at it. It doesn't matter what fertility clinic you're at. And then on the other side, we're working on these enrichment, these enablement tools for generalists, and that's both primary care and OBGYN. And we've roadmapped a digital suite of products to support these clinicians as they grow their service line with fertility. They can start small and keep it small. They can start small and grow it. And I think we have some pretty unique things that we're bringing to market. It all starts with education. It's the one thing that clinicians do love to engage with education. Not only do they like it, they have to do it. They're required to have CEUs in most states. And so we've got a full modular curriculum that can really be tailored to a particular group or practice or individual. But we're also on the precipice of launching all these mini special topic curriculums that are like sized bits for clinicians to take. And then we have other products that we're developing on the heels of that to support them. I always say, like with anything, no matter what kind of product it is, you can build it, you can sell it, but if the activation's no good, what are you going to do? And anecdotally at Mate, we would take clinicians from 0 all the way through IVF. We don't do that here at On2. Not that we won't in the future, but for right now, we don't. And so we would train them. They would do the curriculum. They were avid absorbers of information. And then as they were activating, and we would give them SOPs, workflows. And as they were activating that information and using it with patients, anytime they had a question, they certainly didn't go back to that document. They would just pick up the phone or shoot a text or an email to our clinical nurse. So one of the fast follow products that we're going to be releasing soon is a chat bot for them so that they can query their question, and then it draws from information they already have. But we all know, listen, once you complete whatever, I don't know what you studied in college, but let's call it art history. Once you complete that exam, you're not going back to that textbook. You just want to be able to query and get the answer you're looking for if you can't recall it. So we're deeply thinking on that enrichment and enablement side about how do things actually work. And then we have the advantage of being able to test it in our own clinic, because I think most of the technologies and point systems that are coming to market, they're not coming from someone who has their own clinic to test these things out in. There's a few exceptions I can think of that are doing it that way, but it's what we're really excited about and passionate about.
Nice. That's incredible. How does a patient look like going through Onto Health versus the traditional fertility clinic experience?
I'm going to give you two answers. I'm going to give you the ultimate vision, and then I'm going to give you the reality, the truth of where we are today, which I think is a little bit better than other places. But the ultimate vision is, and I'll use an analogy here. If you think about fertility similarly to oncology, we're really only seeing stage 3 and stage 4 patients. We're not seeing very many patients at stage 0, 1, and 2. And that's because there's not a lot of early information for people. And that's where that generalist piece comes in for us. We believe that for a multitude of factors, that is a critical piece to getting better outcomes, earlier optionality, and lower cost is starting to be able to see those patients. I mean, we hear a lot of rhetoric about how inaccessible it is and how financially challenging it is. And those things are true, but without taking it into consideration that we're basically just seeing stage 3 and stage 4 infertility patients, it's hard to systemically address that. So I'd say that's the big mission. How that relates to patients is our goal is that any patient can go to a generalist and get at least some good information, maybe some good diagnostics, and maybe some progression of treatment, depending on what it is, and then have continuity to be able to move through that system transparently and without having to repeat steps along the way. I think that's one of our big goals. I think that as pertains to how we are doing today, I think that we do probably 50, maybe even 60% more proactive outreach than other clinics, because we just have one, we're not running a network. And so every patient is valuable to us. And I think that the patients feel that when they go through our experience. And we're constantly iterating and trying to improve as we discover new things. And also, as I go through the process personally, little things pop up that may not register. And I'll be honest, I wouldn't have known 50% of the things we're putting in without having gone through the treatment myself.
Wow. What are some examples of that?
Storage is a big one, and I get real soapboxy about it. But once you elect to freeze tissue, your tissue should be accessible to you. You should be able to control the movements of that tissue. People move. We have more of a nomadic culture than we ever did before, I think. Maybe not as much as peak COVID, but still, I think people move around. It feels just inorganic to have to go through this long process to do what you want with your tissue. So I'm a big proponent that I think offsite storage should be the clinical standard. I think there's a legacy mindset that, oh, you generate revenue from having on-site cryo. And the way that my brain works, I'm only thinking about the liability of having on-site cryo. What if something happens? What if there's a tornado? What if something happens like what happened in Palm Springs not too long ago, where someone bombed a fertility clinic? It's a better patient experience to have offsite storage, that they don't necessarily have to run through a whole convoluted clinical oh, let me see if the person I talked to 6 years ago when I froze my eggs is still there and da da da. But that would be, I think, probably a big one, offsite storage.
Got it. Yeah, I agree with you. I probably would be on a soapbox about that too, especially since it's your tissue and the process of extracting it and doing that work is no small feat. I had a friend who actually went through freezing their eggs and what you had to do even up to that process. It's a lot that your body takes a toll. So the once you have it out, that's fine. That's what I want. Like, it should not make it harder than it already is to,
Right.
yes,
And
preserve.
I should be able to, if I'm not getting the level of responsiveness that I'm hoping for from the clinic, I should be able to contact the facility directly and say, "Hey, ship this. Why isn't that?" And I get it. This industry was actually built in more of a boutique fashion, and they're trying very hard to scale. And if I'm being honest, I don't think doing a very good job at it. It's hard to scale an industry that is so centralized around the lab and the clinic. I do think you have to genuinely think outside of the box. You know, one of the things I think about all the time, it sounds a little crazy, but I think about dry cleaning all the time. When I think about it, I'm like, okay, so if I go to my corner dry cleaner and I hand them 5 articles of clothing, and they might keep one or two to do some stitch repair work or stuff, but most of that is getting shipped off somewhere else. And then I'm showing up a few days later with my ticket to pick it up. And I think we have to look at other industries that have done a good job of achieving economies of scale and take bits and pieces to improve how we're currently doing it. I think change is hard. A lot of the people who created this industry are still in it. They're probably not going to change, and that's okay. There's room for everything, I think, especially when we look at the tremendous gaps in how many people need care and how many people are actually receiving care. We look at the declining birth rates. We look at all these things, and there's room for everybody. If somebody's more comfortable going to mom and a pop, or if somebody's more comfortable having a more tech forward experience, you can do either one.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. I think it's really helpful to look at different industries and what's worked. It may not always be apples to apples, but there are learnings that you can take and adapt
Bits
it.
and pieces. My first job was at McDonald's when I think I was 15. I didn't even have my driver's license yet. And there are still things that I think about from that job because, I mean, who was the pioneer of massive scalability and logistics? And then you learn interesting facts about them, and they're more of a real estate company than anything else,
That's
which
a good
is
point. Yeah.
shocking information to most people. Or I heard a great analogy this week where somebody was saying the refrigerator was a massive invention, right? You can now keep your food cool. But that kind of seems logical in a progressive fashion to us now. But at that time, people didn't have a lot of food to keep cool. So then Coca-Cola invents beverages that are better served cold. So like, it's not always the actual thing that's being creative. It's the things around it that are going into it that make it thrive.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Love that, and makes a ton of sense in the parallels to fertility. One of the things you touched on too of this fertility journey and how the term family planning is not really widely known or widely understood what that actually entails. So, curious to get your perspective on what does that actually mean and what are the different steps within kind of fertility and understanding the different options that people can get to? Because I think a lot of times people, when they think of fertility, it's IVF, but there's so much more options beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big question, but I think family planning is all encompassing about what you do or don't want to do to have a baby or to have a family at some point in time in your life. And I think we know a lot more, or it's a lot more common knowledge around like, okay, we can use condoms or we can go on birth control or we can do this stuff. And I think by and large, that's been incorporated in wellness for people. I don't know how I'm not male, so I don't know how much is incorporated in a wellness exam for men, but I'd assume it comes up, maybe. Who can say? And so Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna have to shadow somebody into an appointment now. But I think it's really about asking people, and in truth, I think a lot of people don't know the answer when they're younger, and that's
Mhm.
okay. Increasingly, I think people are questioning having kids at all. I think something that seemed just a given even a decade ago is not so much so now. I mean, there was a recent paper published where they polled people globally about whether or not they were having the size families that they wanted. Overwhelmingly, the answer was no. And there were some obvious reasons: health, finances, geography, access. But what I found really shocking about that study was that the other major factor in people not having the families of the size that they thought they would was loss of hope. And I think that's a
Oh,
really
wow.
devastating piece of information to read and think about and absorb. But I think that family planning, to answer your question a little bit more succinctly, is about knowing your options at the earliest possible time while you still have options. Back to that oncology analogy, I think, and I know this from experience from friends and other people that I meet in the world, I think that people think they have more time than they do. Anyone can have diminished ovarian reserve.
Yep.
We're told it's age related, and generally it is, but that's not always the case. I was talking to somebody not long ago, and they were like, I'm thinking about freezing my eggs, but I don't have any benefits. What's the best way to do this? And my first question was, how old are you? And they said, I'm about to turn 40. And I was like, it's too late. It's not, but it is. You're unlikely to get a high volume of oocytes at that juncture. But even if you do, they're not going to be great quality. And I think that's the thing that's really hard information to absorb, is that somebody may do a follicular scan and say, oh, you're in great shape. You're super fertile at 44. You still have 16 oocyte follicles on this side. They're not going to be good quality. I can almost guarantee it. And I don't get almost guarantee many things, but that's one of them. Just as an example, my wife had to do another retrieval. I guess it was last month. I can't really tell time at this juncture. And she had 21 oocytes. We got 2 good embryos from that.
Wow.
And largely driven by poor egg quality that's age related.
I think that's very good point that you have highlighted. I think we oftentimes think we have more time and then having those conversations later. And it is tough because I also get when you're younger, you may not know what you want. I certainly didn't think I wanted to have kids when I was younger. I was, oh, don't want to go through that. Mainly it was really pain. I hated getting shots when I was a kid. That's like the ultimate pain. I don't want to. But as I've gotten older and you evolve and change, it is something that I actually am considering. And so it's tough because now I'm 30 and it's at a certain age where
You've
it's,
got time, Maddie.
well,
I always
okay, I'm
say
glad on that.
they preserve optionality as early as it is feasible for you, because how you feel at 25 is not how you feel at 30, and it's certainly not how you feel at 35, and it's definitely not how you feel at 40. I also think there are a lot of important scientific works being done in this field. And one of the companies I'm super excited about and passionate about is Conceivable Life Sciences. And they are the first end to end robotic embryology line.
Oh,
So
wow.
it goes all the way through the process. It's something like 280, 300 maybe processes involved in creating an embryo. Now, if you're just egg freezing, it's only going through a portion of those processes, but they're running a clinical trial in Mexico City, and you pay for your travel. You can go get your eggs frozen for free. Problem solved.
Wow. All right. Well, that's a good thing to note for anybody listening where they want to check it out. And
Yeah, hit me up. I'll get you in touch with the folks over there.
you heard it here first, guys. And I love this next part of the podcast. It's one of my favorite sections is myths, common misperceptions, unfiltered real talk about a lot of things that I think many people want to know more about, but maybe either too timid or worried about asking. And so oftentimes we think of fertility issues, it's primarily associated as a woman's problem. But what's really the reality about male factor infertility that people may not know?
It's not good. And it's getting worse faster than female infertility is. And there's a multitude of reasons why. So I can even share the first clinic I was engaged with or involved with. was in the middle of the country, the Midwest. And when I first started heterosexual couples, it was about 50-50
Ooh.
male-female factor. And within a very short period of time, that number had largely skewed to male. I mean, it hadn't gone up 25%, but it was edging up at a significant clip. I talked about it a little bit earlier, but men are getting diagnosed with testicular cancer in their 20s at increasing rates. My niece's fiance, he recently got diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. He's 30 years old, and we're seeing young people get cancer. So that's an extreme version, but also becoming more common. We don't put good stuff in our body, even if we think we are. That's also a problem. There are increasing numbers of men taking supplements that are impacting their quality, motility. Things like the legalization of cannabis is having an impact. As I mentioned at the top of the call, I was shocked to find that was a factor. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense. I don't know all the science behind it, but we're just seeing these things diminish a lot more rapidly than we thought they would be. I mean, even this week, a study was published, or an article was published, that was talking about 10 years ago, the rate of population decline they projected, they were way off. It's going way faster. And so what's true today might not be true tomorrow, but I think that's an area where, and there are companies out there, people can order semen analysis at home. You could do it in the comfort of your home. When we talk to primary care physicians who have high male patient rosters, they're increasingly seeing patients wanting to take supplements that will definitively impact the quality of their sperm. And so if that's something a male is wanting to do, they should absolutely get a semen analysis and do preservation. Quite frankly, I feel like men should just do preservation at 18. It's a pretty easy process for them. It doesn't
Must be nice.
involve,
Yeah.
yeah, injecting with hormones and going through a surgical procedure, blah, 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 blah. But I think that one, there's alarming studies out there. And then compounded with the fact of that loss of hope that we talked about, I think people are kind of just at this don't care anymore phase as well.
Yeah, that's really quite unfortunate and shocking to me too, that loss of hope is so high on the reasons why people don't even want to try. I mean, I have seen and constantly hear about the emotional toll, the stress of trying to get pregnant, but also the piece of financial cost, especially being at Cigna Ventures and just baffled by why is this not covered, or certain parts of this covered, or how can we make it where there is that family planning early on where you can then help them understand their options so that it doesn't come to the point. And if it does, it's a less amount of population is going through that. So
I could not agree more with what you just said. I mean, when you're seeing patients at the late stage of anything, it's going to be more costly and it's going to have a lot more efficacy, which is something that insurers don't like, because at the end of the day, they're actuaries and they have bottom lines to manage. And that's in no way, shape, or form meant to say the big bad insurers. I mean, we just have an interesting system in the United States. I think that you have to be able to provide early information, and it actually starts with enabling those generalists. If you incorporate into a wellness exam an AMH test, which is just blood, all you have to do is add it to the diagnostic panel. You always think about how hard is this workflow to integrate, right? If my doctor said to me at any point in any year of my life, hey, we're going to add AMH, I just want to see where you're at with your ovarian reserve, am I going to fight my doctor on it, especially if it's covered by my insurance? No. Half the time, I don't even think people know what's in their annual blood panel, right? And that's not a
yeah,
criticism of people. It's just like you show up, they take some blood, they call you a week later and say, everything looks good. It's just earlier interventions that I think can make a world of difference. Even if, and we know in this digital era where we have all the information in the world, some of it good, some of it bad, at our fingertips, if my doctor calls me and say, hey, you have diminished ovarian reserve, even if they don't tell me anything else, I have the ability to say, what should I do? I'm 26 and I have diminished ovarian reserve. And guess what it's going to say? It's going to say contact a fertility specialist and do egg freezing as soon as possible.
I completely agree with that. I think what is so fundamental and driving a lot of that hopelessness is your choice gets taken away and you don't realize it. And so having that information and understanding it and being able to feel like you have control of what you can do next is so important. So I love that that's what you're focusing on, is really equipping generalists to have these conversations with patients so that they can understand their options earlier, be more aware of their bodies. One last question that I want to ask is, what is another amazing woman or someone in the women's health space that you think deserves to be heard and is doing great things?
Oh man, I have a huge list. You know, a good friend of mine, her name is Jody Dolan. She's got a nonprofit and she also has a scrub company. It's incredible. So it's healthcare adjacent. I also think Summer Babarek at Hera Fertility
Mhm.
is a really fun person to talk to. And she's working on great things. It has to do with endometriosis. And again, all about earlier intervention. And I could give you a full list, but I'm happy to email it to you afterwards.
Amazing. Yes, I will definitely look into those two folks and would love a list. Always love more recommendations. There's never ending amount of guests that I hope to bring on into the future. And before we wrap up, where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, I publish a lot of articles on LinkedIn about topics that are pertaining to either the patient experience or different components of what we're working on at On2 or the fertility industry in general. I'd say that's probably the best place. Also, onto.health. It's not a .com, it's just onto.health. You can look up what we're doing there. But yeah, I generally, unless it's super spammy, I respond to most messages on LinkedIn. So
Nice. Well, this has been great. Really appreciate you coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation. Definitely an important topic. And I'm so glad that you are building in this space and helping make it a better journey for everyone who wants to conceive, and also giving people some hope back that hopefully in the future that number changes on reasons why not to.
unbelievable, but true. Thank you so much for having me. It was really great and really thoughtful questions. Loved being here.
Amazing. Thanks so much. That's a wrap on this week's episode of Let's Be Heard. I hope you're feeling a little bolder and a little bit more informed about fertility. If this episode spoke to you, share it with someone else who needs to hear it. Big thanks to Traci Keen for getting real and opening up about her experience with fertility and how that led to her journey starting Onto Health. Want to learn more about Onto Health? Check out the links in the show notes. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming episodes. Also, for behind-the-scenes content and more community engagement, follow Let's Be Heard podcast on Instagram. I'm just getting started, so send me a note if there's a topic you want to hear more of, and I'll make sure to cover it. I'm your host, Maddie Holman, and until next time, let's keep making noise and talking about women's health, because it's not TMI.